So apparently there are still a lot of people that have absolutely no idea what to build on Kalista, so it's time for an update. First one on the list is this shit right here. I'm not the biggest fan of it as I prefer something closer to this, but it works. It's mainly about preference. So this is the most basic build on Kalista. It's very simple, high DPS, good survivability, and very flexible. Perfect for most games. It's the most consistent build for Kalista that helps you learn her in and out, though it might take some time because some of the matchups are very hard, but for that, a different build will help you learn them a lot easier. The main advantage of this build is the consistency. You are useful, well, as useful as ADC can be, throughout the entire game. And on top of that you can adjust your build based on what's happening in the game. If you got jungle gapped and have 0 kills, you buy more damage. If your team has 0 front, you get more tanky items. And if enemy has L9 Yamato wannabe fanboy hard stuck in silver, you buy the funny. The way you play with this build is simply front to back, like with most ADCs, except if the enemy is stupid, you can go behind their front and re-engage with ULT. Now for the early game, your best bet are extended fights and all-ins. The longer you fight, the more value from lethal tempo and E, obviously. Most of the time you can do whatever you want on lane, as long as your support has some brain. But if you are just starting out with Kalista, prepare yourself to go absolutely mental, because neither of you will know what the champ does and what are its limits. For mid to late game it's just what you normally do as ADC, so I will talk about it in another video. But if you want to learn even more, feel free to join my coaching Discord server. Or you can join just to chill. Either way, link in the description. Next one is Crit with lethality. The most fun build for her. You basically turn into a ranged assassin. Despite its low consistency, it's the best build for learning Kalista matchups. It helps you deal with really aggressive champs like Draven or Lucian, and it teaches you how to take trades without completely losing the lane, because no matter how badly you're gonna play it, Hail of Blades will make you win by default. The only issue with this build are team comps. If the enemy has a lot of frontline, you will be just as useful as an AFK Yuumi. You really have to rely on your team being able to deal with tanks, while you deal with all the squishy champs. I mean honestly, if you get Gragas level fed you can still deal with them, but since you're a glass cannon you just need to know your positioning, but it's normal ADC thing anyways. The main thing you need to know about this build is that you have to try and close the game as soon as possible, because unless the enemy has 0 tanks or bruisers, you will fall harder than the old AP Pantheon. When it comes to how to play it, in the early game you want to trade whenever you have your rune up, max Q and perma poke. If you don't feel confident in hitting skill shots, you can put more points in E, but it's usually not worth it. If you get early Dirk and your support is any good, you can also overstay on lane a lot and tilt the living shit out of the enemy. For mid game you just want to force objectives as much as you can and kill everything that moves. And for the late game, you pray to God you are still useful and play behind your team, unless you can catch someone. You can also consider side laning, but it's a bit more risky, but it will force more people on you, allowing your team to do something else. And if you like one-shotting people, but prefer more consistency, this build is for you. Very fun and strong build that is at the same time very rewarding. Sadly you have to know Kalista very well before playing it, because it heavily relies on knowledge when you can commit and all in, and when you have to back off. So why would you play it? Well, the thing is, it has similar damage output to the previous build, but at the same time it's more consistent and it scales better against heavy frontline. It's mainly used when you really have to hard stomp the lane, and you also need to scale because your team is mentally ill in game and you have no other way of dealing with the enemy front. Your early game is basically spamming Q and trying to go for semi-extended trades. Just proccing PTA and backing off usually gives you a kill setup. You just have to know who to focus and when to optimize the PTA usage. And for the mid game you have 2 options. You can either do normal ADC stuff playing front to back with your team, or you can be a bit more sneaky and ambush enemies and side lane. And unlike with Hail of Blades, it's not as risky. And of course I wouldn't be myself if I didn't throw in something more questionable, but trust me on this one, it's a very strong build. Very interesting build that works because of a weird interaction between Terminus and Shojin, allowing you to get stacks with just the attacks. The build could probably work just as well on Kog'Maw or Kaisa. It is surprisingly strong throughout the entire game. Who would have guessed? Bruiser item strong, crazy I know. But yeah, it turns you into high damage Bruiser with a lot of tankiness. It's almost the same as the first build. You have similar DPS, but you are way more tanky. The build is also a bit more linear. You do have to have some Kalista knowledge to pull it off though, because the initial build path isn't as rewarding with 2 random curve bows in your inventory, so you have to think about your gold and how to win lane without much lead. But it's still worth playing since it has better scaling against lower range champs. For the gameplay it's the same as the first one, except you can play even more aggressively once you have some items. And by that, I mean a lot more aggressive. Riot made a lot of funny items for tanks and bruisers, so you will be able to survive so much it's insane. And on top of that your damage is still pretty high, so it's a perfect combination to become even more of a frontliner. Now that you know the best builds, don't make me see this kind of shit on the internet, I beg you. And remember that if you still struggle you can always join my server and ask any questions. And if you have any other topic that you want me to go over, let me know in the comments. Also sub to me, thanks, bye.